Hi there, this is Mary Buckham, and I'm opening the classroom just a minute or two early so that people can get in and get comfortable. Where's my cover there? For those just signing in, in order to let me see your name, if you're okay with that, you literally have an option as you're signing in that basically says, StreamYard, give StreamYard permission to use your name. If I don't see your name, I'm just going to have to call you a Facebook user. So welcome to those I can see and those I can't see too. So Denise, Paulette, Jan, not sure. Jade, yay. And Beverly from Toronto. So we have our Canadian contingency. How fun. So someone is looking forward to today's lecture. That's good news. Yay, Riley is here. Paul. And Cheryl. Okay, we have a great group here today. Donna from Ontario. Lori from Santa Clarita. And Marie from South Africa. Jan. Again, if you don't give Facebook permission to post your name, right as you enter, it has on this kind of the second line down third, it says give them permission. If I can't see you, so I can't acknowledge you directly. So I apologize for that. Amy's on board and Laurel's here. Okay, I'm going to give it about another minute or two as people slide in with both feet to get their spots in front of the camera. Okay, did everybody get their 12 stages of intimacy so that you have it as we move forward? Welcome from rainy Central Texas. So Sarah, AKA Jacqueline, is here. And apologies, not sure why we don't have your pen name instead of but I know who you are, so that's good. And Mary's here from Olympia and from Nolans. That's excellent. And from rainy Texas instead of boiling Texas. Bob's on board. Nope. Someone is asking, can you see my name? And no, I cannot. And it's because as you enter it's right here. I'm going to use my example. If I can see it for you. Do this reverse. But there's an introduction to it. And then there is if you want your name. Kale from Maryland. Oh, good. We have Italy on board. The page says this is a public group, though we switched it to private. Absolutely, I will have today's when it officially goes private. It takes them 3 days. So I will double check that, make sure that does work. So some people can see names that I cannot see. Oh, and that's one of Facebook. Because I'm the moderator, it's my Facebook group. They want to make sure that I cannot get more information about you than you are willing to give. But you can see each other's names. So it's just a protection so that if somebody signs into a group and then they're being sold, I don't know, Amway products or something, that it won't work that way. All right, first off, before we get started today, I want to make an apology. A couple of years ago, I had what's called frozen shoulder, and it basically stops the use of your arm. When I do repetitive motions too many times in a row, it flares up. Yesterday, it decided to flare up. So it was my right shoulder, which meant very problematic. I could not even lift a spoon to my mouth. Just cannot move that arm and shoulder. I can, So this means I cannot respond to as many people as I would like to. So what I saw yesterday, and I'm really, really pleased with this, is those writers. We have multi-published writers in this group. We actually have a couple of editors in this group. Anyone who wants to take the time to respond to someone else's posting and give their own personal feedback, that is invaluable feedback, because it lets that poster know this is what a total stranger, a cold reader, is seeing that may not be on the page yet or might be too much on the page. So feel free to step in. I cannot respond to everybody's post. I would love to. I brought a couple along today after we do the little short 20-minute lecture. Leslie, I can see you now. And yes, someone knows that frozen shoulder. It took me a year to make it work again. And this is why, and it's painful. It's very painful. And I want to make sure that I can continue answering as much as possible. But if I might be shorter emails to your postings, look at this or that type of stuff, not having enough time to really go into a lot of depth. So, but please take advantage of seeing you're all of a sudden sitting in an editor's seat in a class like this. So it will help you understand why you're sending it off to an editor or an agent, and they have way more submissions than they have time to take them all on. So we'll go ahead, and if you have a time and you see somebody, and even if you just respond to one other person and say, okay, I see this in yours, I see that in yours, but I'm not seeing this or not making this clear. Because one of the things that came across to me yesterday was most people had the hints of all three elements, specific, what they were seeing, an emotional response, and then some hint of a conflict. But what was happening from a lot was, in order to get those elements, they were submitting multiple paragraphs. And the further away you have those three elements from one another, the slower you're going to tamp down your sexual tension. All right, so I just want to be open about that yet. And no, there's not, it's just me talking here for a minute. So I'll go ahead with the course, but just be aware of that I think if there was one thing that a lot of people learned was they didn't have what they thought was yet on the page. So let's go ahead with our course today. I can do this. All right. Today we're literally talking the difference between conflict versus courtship. because that is what those 12 stages of intimacy are, is about the courtship. The 12 stages of intimacy are the result of years and years of study done by a renowned zoologist, Desmond Morris. And he studied all primates, not just man, but he included man, and he recognized that in spite of the differences between primates, man is still very much a biological phenomenon, which means these 12 stages are not just one person's random assumption of how it takes, how you move from, hey, hello, I'm not sure about you, to I want to be very intimate with you. But this is a scientific study, and all humans are subject to that basic law of animal behavior, unless I think if you're a sociopath or a psychopath, and then all bets are off. Basically, man is in conflict with himself all the time, and at any time can make a purely biological motivated decision, which is to have sex. And that could be based on a reaction to a near-death experience. And then it's an automatic response. If you've gone through a tremendous shock many times, that's when this need to have sex actually is so strong that it overcomes a lot of resistance, because it's our species trying to keep itself alive. There is a tribal aggression decision to have sex or not sex. And this is where sex is used as a means to exert dominance, possession, show rank and power. All of these is that tribal aggressive decision. And there's remnants of that still. You can have in most first world countries, you're still going to have individuals who have that need that is driving their wanting of sex. And people who are posting questions, I will get to them at the end of our 20 minutes, okay? A societal decision to have or not have sex. This includes cultural restrictions, prohibiting or inhibiting the first two drives, such as sex only after legal marriage. So this is why, if you're writing inspirational, if you're writing sweet romances, if you were writing non-romances and you don't want a lot of sex, it's all right, because there are good reasons. Cultural restrictions, faith restrictions, these things can tamp down. Doesn't mean the person doesn't feel the need for sex or the want of intimacy. It simply means that they're not going to easily act on it. Courtship means this tentative, kind of ambivalent behavior that involves the conflicts between fear, aggression, and sexual attraction. So it is all about, I want it, but I know I shouldn't have it. Conflict is about slowly reduced if mutual sexual signals are strong enough. That's the 12 stages. So that's why you reach one stage and then back away, you reach one, back away. These sexual signals can actually be broken down into these 12 very clear, very easily defined stages of intimacy. You do not have to have them in order. If you jump right from the beginning, one of the later stages, then as the relationship changes, it means they're right to sex or something that approaches sex. You can go back when the couple or one of the couple realizes they want something more than simply sex. The average person may not understand the 12 stages. They couldn't rattle them off on a conscious level, but they do understand them on a subconscious level. And the stages have literally been developed over millennia. This is not something that has just come up in the last 50 years, but this is developed primarily as a protection for the women of the species. Of the two sexes, she is the most physically vulnerable, as well as being the one needed to continue the species. So these 12 stages are not about fulfilling sex. When did the pill come out? 1960s, somewhere in there? Prior to that, every act of sex put a person vulnerable to a pregnancy. In a novel, there should be both long-term or book-length conflict. This means conflict that does not end until the end of the book, not because they had sex. Here's a couple of examples. One comes from money and or a social status. The other lacks one or both. Pride and Prejudice. That's what it is. That's what kept the sexual tension high in that story. The Titanic, also different classes, not because these are historical, the class distinctions really different, but they're still alive and present in a lot of ways. Who your parents want you to associate, who your parents do not want you to associate. Another example is one character doesn't fit in a social or professional environment, but that doesn't keep him or her from proving themselves and winning the heart of the one he or she loves or learns to love. So the movie The Spy Who Dumped Me or Legally Blonde. Yes, most of the focus of these stories were about how to survive in this new world that the characters find themselves, but it was also the awareness of the other meant they could not necessarily turn their attention to a relationship because that's not why they were there. They were there to prove themselves. And particularly in The Spy Who Dumped Me, if you didn't prove yourself, you risked death. But that didn't keep the attraction from happening and starting to grow. Another example is a secret one must keep, or the other may be destroyed. Also could be the self might be destroyed, but it could be the other. After the Night by Linda Howard. The female character that halfway or very early in the book, after the quarter of the way into the story, and she was tossed out of her house, and by the halfway point, the reader knew that she had a secret. And that's why she returned to her small town and returned to where the male that she was interested in lived there. But if she let him know that the murder that everybody assumed happened did not happen because her mother was still alive, but not the murderer, she would rock his world all over again. Sky Pirate is a futuristic story. The female is a prisoner in the coalition, being the big bad overarching political group that is dominating. And as a prisoner there, she was wearing a specific banded necklet that she could only move so far away from it or she would basically explode. The male was from a planet that was decimated by this coalition group, and they made a point of it and they hunted down people from his planet. He became a sky pirate so that nobody knew that he was one of these people from this planet. And she is a prisoner of the coalition, but she was also a high-ranking officer in the coalition military. She allowed another prisoner to disappear, and that's why she received the ban. But if he finds out who she is, he will have no reason to keep her alive. She could be payback for everything that happened to his group. If she lets people know who he is from this particular planet, then that puts, he already has a target on his head, but it puts him in danger. The overall story conflict can be supplemented, though, by interim conflicts that enhance the major conflict, but can be resolved throughout the story. So here's an example, Somewhere in Time by Marlene Lovelace. In this story, the female is a U.S. military fighter pilot who is a helicopter pilot. In a sandstorm that happens, she's transported back in time to Roman North Africa. Now, this is not an easy thing to be solved. This is the book length conflict. But an interim conflict, she's picked up almost immediately by a group of Roman centurions, and particularly the head of that group, and brought to a town there in North Africa. Now, the interim conflict is she can't initially speak the Roman language. So that is something that has to be solved, but until it's solved, she can't let him know who she is as if he would believe her. And he can't tell her, and he's a very alpha male because he's a Roman centurion. And so you can have these interim, but you know, the reader knows that if she is left in this world and she cannot get back to her own, he can never allow her to be who she is, because there's no place for women like that in his world. So one or the other really has to change. Now, here's another example. When We Believed in Mermaids by Barbara O'Neill. In this, the book length conflict is growing up in a very dysfunctional family, and she doesn't trust love. And the reason this family was so dysfunctional that they actually used the passion associated with love as a weapon against one another. Now, the interim conflict that can be resolved, maybe 2/3 of the story, it can be, there's a way to talk it through and possibly resolve it. She meets a man in Australia. She's from the US and he's from Spain. They both have very fulfilling jobs they love in their respective countries. But it's not necessarily a deal breaker for them getting together. More for her because she's in the medical profession and that doesn't always easily transfer. But she's come to Australia because she caught sight on a TV newsreel that her sister, who they believed was dead a couple years before, was killed in a train wreck, an explosion. She thought she saw her sister. So the whole trip involves family memories and dredging up those parts of her past that were so painful. And then she meets this guy who she doesn't trust because she could fall in love with him. And it's very clear up front. Okay. So now I'm going to go into some of the responses from yesterday's homework assignment before I give you the homework assignment for today. First off, there was a question that was raised and I want to make sure that I respond to it. Chris said, I thought sexual tension was chemistry, but chemistry can happen without conflict. Absolutely. Sexual tension is the buildup physically, emotionally, and energetically, including their resistance or challenge to whatever they should or should not be together. Great, that was a summation. This is part of an aha moment that she had. So here's the question. So if you have a love scene where everything is finally coming together, at least physically and in intimacy, that's not sexual tension because the conflict is resolved. Yes and no. The kind of conflict, the examples that I gave you today, the kind of conflict we see in a lot of those movies and TV shows, having sex does not resolve the conflict. You don't want sex to make everything it's perfect, unless sex is the last thing that they do. So having sex in the Barbara O'Neill book, she had sex with this man in Australia. Wonderful, satisfying, great sex. But the more it was, the harder it was for her to let go of her fears of love as a bad thing. He did not have that issue. She had that issue. And that was the primary issue. So even as they had sex, she wanted to pretend to herself that it should not make a difference. And so she walked away from him, thinking it's over with him. It was a great, lots of moments, but it did not resolve the conflict. So the book length conflict, if you have a conflict that is based on bickering, that is based on someone said something or someone, and if they could walk across the street, like the little gingerbread men, and find a box of coffee, sit down and talk. Not that they would, but if they could. If they talked, would the conflict be over? If the answer is yes or probably, that's not book length conflict. Okay, so let's look at some of the examples that were posted to the group. This is from Sarah Lynn. Context. The female main character and the male main character have a history, but they've been away from one another for years. He goes to her farm to complain about her sons in his airplane hangar, but the boys are hiding from him. This is where he thinks to draw the boys out. Now, this, again, I really appreciate those who were able to put a context, because a lot of my questions had to deal with, I'm not sure where the conflict is. And some people would say, this is what happened before, this is what happened later. But as Chris mentioned, and 100% agree with, the closer you put the conflict to one another, the easier that the reader catches it and feels it. So this is from her novel. Every situation he had faced in the past month coalesced into a giant ball of emotion when his skin brushed hers. All the dormant feelings rose and flattened him in the gut like a steamroller. The look on her face probably mirrored his, but they couldn't talk about it because the boys raced to the steps and stopped, their tennis shoes squeaking on the walkway. Okay, someone says they cannot read this. All right, let me do this. There, okay. Took me out of the picture. So now you can see it. Now, remember what we're looking for. Specific awareness. We are looking for emotional response, and we are looking for conflict. Now, that giant ball of emotion right there, it's saying that he has an emotional response. What did he have this response to? Brushing of skin. Now, it's not clear. It could be hand to hand, it could be hand to body, it could be, but it is the touch of bare skin against the other. It could be a handshake for all that. But the point is, it's here. All right. We know that there is emotion. Second sentence, also emotion. All dormant feelings rose and flattened him the gut like a steam roller. Right? So we have that. We just don't have what, and it may just be because it was done before this, that which stage it is clearly. But it is wonderful tension, because then you have the reason, the conflict, the reason they can't just act on this attraction is the boy's presence. She is a single parent. The boy's presence, he doesn't want to act in front of them because that puts her in an awkward position. Now, it's very subtle. And for example, you see how Jan had a response here. I don't see it. What's missing is the conflict. I'm missing the conflict. So this is why, okay, I've got to figure out how to do this. This is what Sarah Lynn did. Sentence 1, awareness, yes. Sentence 2, there was also emotion. It started with emotion, it went into awareness, it was the skin to the skin. The second was emotion sentence, the third, the conflict. That conflict may not be overall book conflict. To me, it's coming across as an interim conflict because of the situation with her sons being there. But it could be, if the reader is aware of this, why she does not necessarily want to, but both of them realize acting on the attraction at that time. It's not saying that other than that. But yes, it has the 3 elements there. But even giving Jan's comment here, the touch, depending on what the touch with, and the conflict, short term, at least, is the boys potentially interrupting the moment. And that can keep someone as a parent from acting any further. But the fact that it's not clear, but Sarah Lynn kept it to a sentence, and or a paragraph, and she analyzed it herself. But that's exactly what a way to move forward with your own writing. So good job, Sarah Lynn. All right, this is a regency. Now, a regency is a very specific time frame that had very tight rules of society that kept a couple defined and acting on awareness. Now, this is what Shirley wrote. She was acutely aware of the warmth of his large right hand in the small of her back. Now, for those who have not yet memorized the 12 stages, that is actually a 6th stage of intimacy. And it's a 6th stage because the hand to the waist or the hand to the lower back is not something that a woman in particular will allow a man to do. She won't accept that from her boss. She won't accept it from someone she's casually met. The hand is close to the genital region, and that kind of increases the tension there. So this is why there can be a lot of confusion when, well, I just put my hand on her back. Well, middle of the back, safe. Lower, near the waist, higher tension, higher sexual interpretation of what that move is. So applying just enough pressure to guide her, avoiding colliding with other couples on the crowded dance floor. Good thing it was leading because she was oblivious to anyone else in the room. This is the emotional response that this character was having. No silk or kid leather separated the bare skin of her right hand, tucked securely tucked in his left. Okay, we go back to hand, which is the fourth stage. Now, the fact that it's bare hand increases the tension. Why? Because you're touching skin to skin. His fingers curled around hers, though she felt the calluses on her fingertips. She taught at a school for girls too long. Holding hands with a man felt erotic. This kind of gave me a speed bump stop, because erotic, as a teacher in that time period of girls, this sounded a little too contemporary a term. So you want to be careful. It might, because that would, for a Regency reader, and there's a paradigm of Regency readers. There's the ones who could step back into Regency England or France right now and fit in. And then there are those that understand the rules but break them anyway. So that may be a challenge there. But you picked a good word next, naughty. Now, naughty is a word that in a contemporary environment, that's not so bad. But in this time frame, that hands with man felt naughty. Clearly, lets her know an emotional reaction there. Now, the last line, she was a traveler in the desert, finally reaching an oasis. That kind of resolved conflict, that she's comfortable with this. So you've gone stage 4 and stage 6. So you're halfway through the 12 stages of intimacy. So saying that this made her feel good and everything was all right with her helps resolve the conflict. So I would recommend not making that so accepting from her that they've gone this far. So words, again, other people are giving you not sinful unless she has, the Church of England background or something like that, that would come natural. It has to come natural to that particular character. And you know your character. But I love the other suggestions that are given. And Paulette brings one that's scandalous. And that would be, she has her position to keep in mind. No matter what this man, but she cannot be seen to be scandalous, because that has a double-edged sword. She would lose her occupation. She would probably not be able to get other occupation. So yes, technically the word erotic did, but you have to be aware of the readership and be aware that it could be problematic. Even if technically you cannot insert yourself as the author and say, but technically this is correct. You have to think, what's the average reader going, their response to that word? All right, here's something from Paulette. Okay, this is the first part. Josh Sarche stopped at the screen door leading into the kitchen to observe his lady love, Irina Tarasso. Every time the sight of her took his breath away like a punch to the solar plexus. Now, up until this point, the reader is not seeing her at all. His gaze followed her gently swaying hips as they rocked to Bryan Adams cooing about how to love a woman. So that's a nice sensory detail that is not simply touch or sight. He swallowed hard at the sight of her and the sound of the music. So yes, we're getting an emotional response from him. The first time he'd heard that song, she'd been dancing to it, and he'd known she was the one. Seeing her at last all these months after the accident, here comes our conflict. Naturally giving into the music's hypnotic pull, had his eyes welling up. He blinked away the wetness in awe of this tiny step to his dancer's return to the world she loved. Okay, we have, let me go back one slide. Just want to do this. Okay, the one detail, the one specific what he is seeing, it is her hips swinging. The fact that she is dancing. So the specific awareness, now it might have been, that could be enhanced slightly so that it's give the reading, because that her hips swaying, it is also buried in the middle of this paragraph. And that's where you want to bury something that you don't want the reader to easily see. So all the, there's amazing emotion in this. And there's clear hint of conflict, but the specific awareness, you're spending your words here on talking about who the musician is and that they have this past, and he's very emotional. But you've got, on the ratio of those three areas, you have lots of emotion. In the conflict, the hint and the specific awareness is that she is moving. Yes, a punch to the solar plexus seems to me to give awareness. It is awareness. But you have, of those three, look at how it's weighted. So if you brought up the conflict a little more, or the specific awareness to more than simply her movement. I mean, it's beautifully written. We're hinted at the conflict with the fact that since the accident. But do you see, people are wondering, and again, depending on where the story this is, that might be really clear. In this particular passage, you get gold stars galore for the emotion. And for some reason, that is just enough. But if you want to ramp up the sexual tension, you have to ramp up the specific awareness. Let him spend a little more time describing what he's seeing, that she, not that she's just dancing. That is, someone who loves someone else will be very happy because of that and touch that it's come back. And so that's what we're seeing here. And the more you have one of the three elements at the cost of the other two elements, you are making it harder for the average reader to immediately grasp. You got a great start here, Paulette. Just a little hint more of what that conflict means to him, what he is seeing specifically. It could be, I don't know, it could be your hair, it could be all sorts of things. So as you can see here, some people are definitely not seeing the conflict because where it's not enough for them. Here's another one from Ginger. Okay, I have 2 slides. When the maitre d' escorted her to my table, she took my breath away. Okay, that's emotional response. The stunning red silk dress she wore clung to her body, outlining every amazing curve. Okay, He's looking at his body. Her glossy dark hair flowed down her back almost to her waist. More specific awareness here. But it was the sweet sound of her voice that assured me this was my darling girl. Okay. So we have eye to body and we have voice, but there's, and I think it was probably just, maybe it was shortened or something, but there's no voice. So the author just saying that he or she heard their other voice doesn't let the reader hear it. This continues, Ginger's, the cute, smart teenager that graduated at the top of her class only 4 years ago was now an independent 22-year-old, dark-eyed, beautiful woman I hardly recognized. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. Never in my wildest dreams could this happen. I was her trusted guardian, her knight in shining armor, the man who saved her, who raised her. This shouldn't happen. Yet there I sat, desiring her. Now, a lot of this end of this paragraph here is telling, because we are in his thoughts, but is trying to fill in. Now, he could have filled in before when he first saw her. Let's go back to that. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. Every curve of her, every amazing curve. But then the shift to the voice. If the focus kept on, I can't believe she was already 22. Something more deeper into the point of view of the character, as opposed to pulling back from the character and summing up information that is being told to the reader. 22-year-old, beautiful woman. Again, beautiful woman is one of those vague descriptions. She was amazing, she was beautiful. But why? Why? And yes, someone says, I don't think the point of view character recognized her at first. And saying, I hardly recognized. It's too much telling in a way as if it is being explained to the reader and not coming from this point of view character. So, never in my wildest dreams, trusted guardian, her knight in shining armor, the man who saved her. That's all backstory. Okay, so someone is saying, and I can't see the name, so I don't know, Ginger, if this is you or not. Her voice triggered his memory. Okay, then all I can respond on, I'm seeing, and I'm seeing first. Let me go back. Sometimes I hate computers. All right, the whole first part is him seeing her. There is no voice heard. We're just told that it's heard. And then we're spending too much, the same amount of time that we were spent on showing her is spent on telling the reader that this, why do we need that she graduated 4 years ago from, I guess, high school, it must have been. Tighten in. As Jenna says here, feel like the emphasis is for emphasis and pointed for the purpose of highlighting the forbidden trope. Yes, it is. But it does not, it feels like it is more in his head than in his body. And as Trish points, it is an info dump. This is great cover blurb. Laurel mentions this. It has enough to entice the audience, so it has all the pieces asked for. But in the body of the story, we went from he sees her to reasons he can't get her. And in between, we're given her age and this type of information. So more visceral reaction needed? Absolutely. Because on the back cover blurb, it's telling, and that's what you need there. But this is, he's in his head and trying to tell the reader that his role in her life. But think of a man in this position. He sees somebody that he's been the guardian for. And instead of, he's telling why it's not, almost melodramatic, why he cannot have her, instead of the gut reaction that says, well, this isn't going to work. I'm her guardian, for God's sake, or for Pete's sake, or whatever. That's a much more male response instead of looking at this distant view of why he can't act on it. So almost there. Okay, let's look for Riley. Sean has been shot and burst into a random house on a residential street to get help taking care of his wound. He and the woman are complete strangers, never having met before. Okay, I really appreciate when someone gives me a setup so I have at least an idea. Now, from Riley. And I have 2 slides to get the information across. Sean made a quick assessment of her. Early 20s, lithe, harmless, barefoot, stringy denim cutoffs, black tank top, hairstyled in a 70s throwback, parted in the middle with lush waves framing her face and falling to her shoulders. Intelligent, bright blue eyes, like the ocean on a sunny day. Beautiful. All right, I'm going to go back to this. The man is shot. What is he looking for? He's looking for safety and security. Would he really be looking at her black tank top, denim cutoffs, how her hair is parted? It is a little bit too much given the great situation. What are you looking for? Harmless. Lush waves framing her face, falling to the shoulders. I could overwhelm her. She's not, given the situation, that's the problem right now, is that there's too much information. Now, what that means is that you have the opportunity to revisit this stage, because when you are hyper-focused on simple survival, and I'm assuming that if someone's been shot, there might be someone going after him, but this is, okay, someone saying somewhere, Riley explained he's a time traveler, and studying detail is part of what he does. Good. That helps. However, and if the reader knows that, that can help. But if you got a bullet in you and you're bleeding, Hannah says, as someone that's taken care of a lot of people that have been shot, all they tell you is, I've been shot. They're just focused on the very basic survival. So yes, to show that he's been shot and and is dealing with that, this guy who usually is very analytical and can take in all this information, let him take it in after the immediate, he's not afraid of dying or somebody killing him. So he needs a break there. This is way too much information, even if this is what he does in a normal situation. This is not a normal situation. So that's why it is why you can revisit the stages, especially if you have a stage that is, if you're in an accident. Jojo Myers did this. She was a character, was on top of the roof, fell through somebody's awning. That stopped her fall. The guy in the ambulance has taken her to the hospital, kept talking to her to bring her, keep her aware and anxious. And she kind of grabbed it as a lifeline. And then when they met later, she started noticing other things. It was too much to her focus on things such as what he was wearing in the ambulance. No, she was just focused on the basic. And I would think in this situation too, particularly if you're from another planet and your security is a main function. So let me look at the second. He blinked in surprise as this last bit of data registered, but shrugged it off. He stood upright on borrowed strength and could not afford distraction. But there was more. He sensed recognition in those eyes. Okay, in this type of situation, the conflict is clearly going to be, he's not from this world. That's a good book-length conflict. In this particular example, you had a lot of specific detail, almost too much specific detail for the situation. And that's always you have to remember in that context. He has an emotional response and the hint of a possible other conflict, that sense of recognition. And as other people are saying, yes, by all means, keep the details, but not, could he use her or not use her initially? So what details does he need to make that assessment? Then as she's patching him up or something, or so he's been there for a while and he's catching his breath and he's realized he's not going to immediately die or immediately be found, then he's going to look at some of these other details. Okay, and Riley, you're getting a great response on that. He sensed recognition in those eyes. That's the kind of question that writers raise that are invaluable because it keeps the reader reading to find out. Okay, I have a short one from, I think it's Rhonda. Alex focused on his hand so that she didn't stare at his face. That wasn't as much help as she'd hoped. He had nice hands with long brown fingers that were slightly darker at the flexion points. Now, if this character is in a medical field and knows what the flexion points are, that would be a very character refining definition, but of why this is how she's thinking. But it is not necessarily, if she's not in the medical field and she's a botanist, let's say, I have no idea. So this is why I'm qualifying so that you know it's not necessarily the passage, it is the context, and I don't know it, and that's all. Knuckles, yep. Because you don't want them pulled out at this point thinking about what is a flexion? Well, I assume it means knuckles, but I don't know. All right. She had a sudden fantasy of those fingers brushing against her jawline. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I should go back to work. She stood up abruptly. Jian looked up at her, his expression puzzled. Oh, is it something I said? Okay. Yes, I know flexion points are joints, but the point here that I'm trying to make is that if you're using a word that is a little esoteric, that's an opportunity for the reader to be pulled out. Knuckles, joints. That's simplify it, make it clear. Unless she is in some occupation that she would think of them as flexion points. But you're going to create an unintentional speed bump for the reader. So conflict is not here. And we're good specific what she's looking at. Hands are wonderful because guys' hands are a lot different than women's hands. And so that's perfectly natural that she would notice that. Maybe big toes, not right away, but this is body to body. The only thing that's not clear is conflict. So we had very specific. There's no need to go to she had a sudden fantasy of those fingers brushing her against her jawline. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. So that's the emotional response that she had to her thoughts. And it can come across, I'm not saying it is, but it could come across that could be a jump for the reader from looking at his hands to this fantasy of those fingers. But it's just wondering how would those fingers brushing against her jawline feel? Might be more immediate and less sexually feeling like you're layering sex in here. Just my 2 bits, you can disregard it altogether. Okay, we have one more example before we give the homework. So, boop. Leave. Without any apparent conscious decision making on my part, I covered the distance between the two of us, stopped only by his sharp inhale. I pressed my hand to the wall, nails digging into the digging into the flocked paper. He stood still, breathing fast and shallow, his scent enticing me to go closer. Now, this is proxemics, and I'm not really going to cover that in this week because there's so much to cover. But proxemics basically mean the closer a person is to your intimate zone, which means anywhere from body to body or 6 to 18 inches, the more the characters are aware of the one another. So this is used very good here. So he stood still, breathing fast and shallow, his scent enticing me to go closer. Your sex, I did not stutter, is not the problem. My response to it is, however. Okay, so I believe this is male on male, but this is a really interesting, it's not one of these stages that we're looking at, but it is a very clear, you have somebody move that close into your space from the sex that you're attracted to, and you are going to respond. So very strong, specific, because of the proxemics. So, and the fact that the guy stutters, even though he's telling himself he's not, he is very aware and feeling the presence of the other. So next part, I could no more meet his eyes than I could have flown to the moon. His heartbeat should have chased me away. The brush of his breath against my throat should have driven me into my room. Not a problem to me, he whispered, the words tickling my skin. So very specific awareness, the proxemics on top of that. The fact that first guy is avoiding the eyes of the second guy says, I'm not ready to go to that level. And then you have as Jenna says, it is hot. It is hot. It's very sexually tense. The conflict isn't quite clear, but it's clear that the first guy is very aware of the second, but he doesn't want to be that aware. His buttons, he's being triggered. And the second guy is basically pushing that awareness and making it clear he doesn't have the restraints on him. So great job here, and I wanted to make sure that you knew that. Now, let's look at the assignment for today. This is, we're going to talk about conflict again. Identify in your book length, in your manuscript, or the thought of your manuscript or work in progress, your book length conflict. So I want you to identify the one that is not going to be resolved until the end of the book. Not when they have sex, but to the end of the book. And I also want to see what a possible interim conflict is. If you don't have a manuscript, use one of the movies you watched, use a book that you've read, whatever it is. Book length conflict. She betrayed him once. Can he trust her again? This is something that'll take the whole book to resolve. This is an internal conflict, not an external one. But an internal conflict could be, can she keep her secret safe from him? Now that conflict might be resolved much sooner. In a different book, that might be the book length conflict. This just show you what I'm looking for. And for those, just to clarify, when you use the hashtag capital H numeric number of an assignment, put them all together. Don't make spaces in between them. Don't put periods. Don't put anything else, because that means that I'll be able to see it quicker. So again, I want to remind you, I can't get to all the postings. So I'm take the opportunity to help your fellow writer and do exactly what you're doing here today. Saying, I like this, doesn't give the read or the poster enough feedback. Say why. I think the emotional response is out of this world. I think the conflict is very strong. I think I see emotion and conflict, but I don't see specific details. That's all you need to do. Question just raised. What if the conflicts are not related to sexual tension? All those examples I gave you, not one of them were related to anything about sex. It was other issues that they had to resolve, other conflict. So it doesn't have to be sexual tension in the sense, this is one of the mistakes people always assume, and I'm not pointing out as a bad thing here, that they assume that sexual tension means sex. It's not. It is they want intimacy. They want to get together on some level. But because of the conflict, different worlds for both of them. It could be literal worlds, or it could be society worlds. That has nothing to do with sex. So when we're looking at the conflict, it's not the only, I'm thinking of an example. Someone was writing a historical in Victorian times, and the man had syphilis and knew it. Now that could be related to sex, why he would not feel comfortable having sex with her, knowing that the chance of infecting her was pretty high. And the fact that to infect a woman would not simply be about, it would be giving her possibly a death sentence. Do we post a paragraph with the conflict? I'd like you to keep it as tight as possible. And the reason being is, let me go back here. Do you see? It doesn't have to be, and just like people were finding in posting their other examples for yesterday's homework, is they thought that posting longer would get the sexual tension shown. But right there, it alerts you to an issue. If you cannot do it in a paragraph, a tight paragraph, and there's some people who can, and the examples that I give, I put them up so you can see them easier in the slides. But the whole point is to find, and if you don't have it on the page yet, don't worry, make something up. Just so you know what it means and how it can be shown. As you're writing your story, particularly the deeper you get into the 12 stages, the longer it takes. Couple having sex is not done in a paragraph. It is usually takes a whole chapter to do that. So, but keep it tight. If you can't refine your conflict to this kind of couple lines for both, it's probably because your conflict is not clear or too it's muddled. Okay, Jenna, we're posting the conflict or a paragraph from the book that illustrates the conflict. Oh, nope, only just the conflict. You're not posting something from the book. All right, so let me go back to some of these. Okay, he was saying he's a vampire who was a monk. Okay, that makes sense. There's very clear conflict. If the reader knows that that second guy is a vampire and the first guy is not. So let me go right back to the beginning because there's a big question there. And there's one, okay, I did that one. Someone, and again, I just can't see a name, would spreading them out, meaning the three stages or the three elements that you need, the specific awareness, the emotional response, the clear conflict, be a deliberate way to slowly build the tension? Actually not. Perhaps then leading to a paragraph that combines them all, it could. Only if you have that additional paragraph, because the closer they are together, the stronger the tension. So depending on the degree of tension that you want in your story, you want them to be as close together. If you build to it, having one and then the awareness or the emotional response, and then the awareness, and then the conflict. Yes, you're building towards it, and then you're giving more of a punch by having them closer. So yes, you all are writing. You get to make these kind of choices. But yes, the further apart they are, the less likely it is going to be tense. The closer they are together, the tenser it is. All right. All right, there's some posts, quite sure. All right, so that's it. Let me see if there's any last post, or otherwise we're gone for a day. Leslie asked, if we miss a day and watch the video, should we still post the homework? Absolutely. There's no limit. Where the limit comes is that if we get down to our fifth day and everybody's trying to post, I am one person and I cannot get to all the homework. So others might get to it. And that's part of there might be somebody who is willing to respond and let you know. But I cannot get to everybody's. And I want to be clear about that, nor should I. It is not about me telling you yes, no, maybe. It is about you understanding, and if I get to one assignment but not another of yours, don't take it personally. It's going to happen. So the more you can work with each other, the better it's going to be. So that's our day today, and I appreciate your being here. We went a little bit over. Keep the 12 stages beside you when you're looking at, but in the conflict, getting clear about it, that is going to make everything so much easier for you moving forward with your story or seeing what's missing. So thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I'll try and respond to as many as I can, but it will not be everybody. All right. So thanks and take care.